When you hear the word Chernobyl, what do you picture? For most of us, it's a single devastating image, a nuclear catastrophe that poisoned the Earth and sent thousands fleeing for their lives. It's pretty much the definition of a wasteland. And yet, believe it or not, for a small handful of people, that toxic, forbidden zone is something else entirely. It's home.
So let's talk about these people. They're often called samoseli, which is a Ukrainian word that basically means self-settlers. But as the poet Lena Kostenko says right here, that word, it just doesn't sit right. It's kind of offensive. Because, think about it. They weren't settling some new frontier. They were just going back to the only home they ever knew.
And that really is the million-dollar question here, isn't it? After everything we know about the radiation, the contamination, the health risks, why on earth would anyone make the choice to live there? It just seems impossible to understand.
To even begin to wrap our heads around this, we've got to understand who we're actually talking about. This isn't some huge migration. We're talking about a tiny, incredibly determined community of people who looked at official orders, barbed wire fences, and warnings from the entire world and just went home anyway.
So how many are we talking about? Today, it's a small number. The estimate is around 130 of these self-settlers are still living inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And here's the key part. Almost all of them are elderly. These are people who decided that, you know what, the risk of radiation was somehow less scary than the certainty of dying from a broken heart in exile. Let me introduce you to someone. This is Yevhen. And his words, wow, they really put it all into perspective. He was a middle-aged man when the disaster happened. He went back, and he's lived there for more than 30 years. For him, this isn't just a toxic zone. It's where he spent the majority of his adult life. To really get why he'd make that choice, we have to rewind the clock to the night that changed the world. Okay, so let's go back. It's 1986. Before its name was a synonym for tragedy, Chernobyl was actually a point of pride, a real shining example of Soviet technology. But a badly designed safety test was about to unleash a complete nightmare that would poison the land for not just generations, but millennia.
So how is this thing even supposed to work? Well, honestly, the basic idea is surprisingly simple. The best way to think of it is like a giant high-tech kettle. You split uranium atoms, which creates an insane amount of heat. That heat boils water into steam. The steam spins a turbine, and the turbine makes electricity. Simple concept, right? But it's powered by some of the most complex and, as we'll see, dangerous machinery on Earth.
And what's truly terrifying is just how fast everything fell apart. It all starts on April 25th with a so-called safety test. But as things progress, they make some really bad calls. For one, they disable the emergency core cooling system. Yeah, you heard that right. Just after midnight, the reactor's power level completely crashes, putting it in a super unstable state. Then, at 1:23 in the morning, they start the test. 43 seconds later, that's it. Two huge explosions blow the reactor core to pieces, launching the 2,000-ton lid off the top of the building like a champagne cork.
So, the big question, who was to blame? Well, at first, the official Soviet line was very simple. It was human error. They pointed the finger directly at the guys in the control room. But years later, a deeper investigation found a much darker truth. The reactor itself was fundamentally flawed. Its big secret was that the control rods, the very things meant to shut it down in an emergency, could actually cause a power surge. So yeah, the operators made mistakes, for sure, but they were basically trying to fly a plane that was designed to crash.
Those explosions released an invisible cloud of radioactive poison that drifted across the continent. The immediate response was to try and contain it and get everyone out, creating this forbidden territory, a dead zone, that still exists to this very day.
The first people to pay the price were the heroes on the ground. 2 workers died in the blast themselves, and the first responders, the firefighters who ran towards that radioactive inferno, 134 of them came down with acute radiation sickness. It's a truly horrific way to die, and for 28 of them, death came within just a few months.
And beyond those first heroes, the sheer scale of the displacement is just staggering. In the days and weeks that followed, more than 115,000 people were forced to just abandon their homes, leaving behind their entire lives.
And here's the part that's just heartbreaking. This is the official announcement they made to the people living in Pripyat, the city right next to the power plant. They were told it was a temporary evacuation for 3 days tops. Can you imagine? They packed a small bag. They left their pets. They thought they were coming right back. They never did.
So the authorities drew a 30-kilometer circle on the map around the reactor and called it the exclusion zone. And to stop the contamination from spreading further, They did something drastic. They brought in bulldozers and literally just buried entire villages, wiping them completely off the map.
So, the immediate fire was out. The people were gone. The crisis was kind of over. But the real problem, the invisible enemy, had just settled in. The fallout seeped into the soil, the water, the trees, the animals, creating a toxic legacy that's going to last for thousands and thousands of years.
And this is why the problem is so permanent. It all comes down to this concept called half-life, which is just the time it takes for a radioactive element to become half as dangerous. Now, for something like cesium-137, that's about 30 years. Bad, but you know. But then you look at plutonium-239, its half-life is over 24,000 years. Just let that sink in. That's longer than all of recorded human history. This isn't a mess you can just clean up. It's basically permanent.
And this isn't some abstract, theoretical risk. The health consequences were very real. One of the clearest, most documented impacts was a massive spike in thyroid cancer, especially in people who were kids back in 1986. They drank milk from cows that ate the contaminated grass, and all that radioactive iodine went straight to their thyroids. The numbers just skyrocketed.
Okay, so let's just take a breath. A world-changing explosion. A landscape poisoned for millennia. A proven legacy of cancer and disease. Which brings us right back to that original baffling question. Why in God's name would anyone go back?
The answer for people like Yevhen has absolutely nothing to do with Geiger counters or scientific reports. It's emotional. It's primal. He literally says he felt like he was dying away from his home. For him, the sadness and the stress of being a refugee were a more immediate, more certain threat to his life than the radiation was. In his mind, going home saved him.
And yet, the cold, hard science doesn't care about feelings. The facts are clear. These people are growing food in contaminated soil. Every vegetable they pull from the ground, every mushroom they pick, absorbs things like cesium-137. The danger is real, and it's on their dinner plates every single night.
But then you have the perspective of another resident, Hannah. Her words, they just cut right to the heart of it. I do not see this radiation. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? It's an invisible enemy. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. So for someone whose entire life is tied to that piece of land, the tangible feeling of being home is just so much more real than some abstract threat they can't even perceive.
And then Hannah says this, and it just stops you in your tracks. She says there was radiation in 1933. She's talking about the Holodomor, the horrific, man-made famine that killed millions of Ukrainians. For her generation, who survived starvation and war, their entire definition of disaster is different. An invisible poison just doesn't compare to the very real memory of having absolutely nothing to eat.
And that's really what this all boils down to. For the Samolese, it was a choice between two kinds of death. A slow, potential death from an invisible poison in the one place they loved, or a faster, more certain spiritual death from homesickness in some strange place they didn't. They chose home.
And this really leaves us with one final big question. We put these labels on places, right? Forbidden zone, uninhabitable. But the story of the self-settlers, it just challenges all of that. It forces you to ask, if a place is your home, if it's woven into who you are, can any outside force, even a nuclear catastrophe, ever truly make it uninhabitable?